Hi guys, Brendan Valley here, head coach and founder of Orient Institute of Cricket. I'm also a current selector of the Penrith Green Shield squad, and have previously been a captain at the Penrith Cricket Club, and been a representative coach as well. My knowledge of picking teams is pretty high, and I thought that I would provide some content around some of the questions that I go through as a selector, in terms of what I'm looking for or how I see how players can fit into a team, when obviously, being in a trial-based environment and having to pick teams. Obviously, there's can be a lot of contention with these types of, representative trials because some people think that person A should have gone in and can't understand why person B gone in and all these types of things. So hopefully these questions, and the points I make in this video start to get you to understand or think from a slightly different perspective. So we'll go through each slide one by one. So here are the 8 questions that I feel like I ask myself when I'm selecting teams. And we'll go through these slide by slide. So in terms of picking a team, obviously, in terms of representing cricket, you're usually picking a squad of 12. In terms of Green Shield, you're picking a squad of 15. Um, so in terms of when you go and pick that squad, you need to understand what roles um, are needed for that team environment. So you need to understand what type of competition's being played. For example, a limited overs competition. You're going to be looking for players who are probably batting a little bit higher strike rate wise, um, than maybe if you're picking a 2-day or a 4-day competition team. Um, It's also important as players that you understand what role that you think you might be in a team so that you can play in your trial a certain way to then reflect what particular role you might fit into that team. So there's other things to consider as well. Obviously some players, are more likely to make teams than others. So us as selectors then look for, well, where are the gaps? What isn't there at the moment that we're needing to look for? So for example, if there's 3 or 4 batters in an age group that look really, really awesome and they're pretty much straight locks into a team, then we're looking for, okay, what's left? Do I need to look at spin bowlers? Do I need to look at, a batting all rounder? Do I need to look at a wicket keeper? All these types of things play a role in what we look for. The next part is, does the player have the match experience or previous results to indicate that they can fulfill a role in the team? So obviously stats don't tell the full story. A lot of kids play different types of cricket that either allow them or limit them to, um, you know, getting the stats that they want. So, for example, if you play in a team, a junior team that likes to share roles and responsibilities around every week, which I think is a really good way to do things, your stats might be a little bit worse off than a kid who plays in a team where they just try and win every game of cricket. Um, so stats don't say anything, don't say everything, but they give us a guide or an understanding as to the skills of a player. Um, The other point here is the fact that often we will speak with coaches or other entities, whether it be the club and the players' junior team, to understand how those players have performed and maybe why they've got certain results. Obviously, from a net trial perspective, it helps us understand technique, but from my perspective, I like watching trial games because it gives us that understanding as to how a kid's technique moves into a game-based environment, which is obviously what we want to be picking people off. Um, Next point, is the player technique good enough to be consistent over the course of the season? Technique is very important in cricket, obviously. It is not the be-all and end-all. And I think the main part of this is the key concepts for a coach when picking a team or selectors is being able to find people who are going to be consistent, because it's very, very difficult to work with a bunch of individuals who are very inconsistent because you don't know when they're going to fail. You don't know when they're going to be good. You don't know why sometimes that happens. When you have players who are consistent, it's very easy to plan things. So in terms of having, a very efficient batting technique, where you're able to move into the ball, transfer forward and back, play through the line of the ball. Obviously, it allows you um, to be a lot more settled in terms of not getting out. And it also then allows you to play against high level bowling. So obviously that's important. And then obviously an efficient technique bowling wise allows you to bowl consistent line of length, but also be repeatable with that bowling action, so it keeps you on the park. Um, so that's that. That's what we look for. This one's a really important one, and I don't think it is understood enough by parents. As a selector, I do not want to see that a kid has played for 35 different clubs by the age of 12. It doesn't sit well with me. So selectors and grade and slash representative clubs want to invest in players who want to play at a particular club. We don't want to invest in players who shop themselves around to every club in the competition. It's not a good look. Um, we will, and most selectors look to promote homegrown talent first because it keeps local clubs happy that we're providing opportunities for those players. And as I mentioned, it's not a good look when you've played for 10 different clubs by a very early age because that stability and the consistency are the keys to being able to develop a player. If you're constantly moving in and out of different environments, a lot of players might not be able to handle that. Some might, and they thrive in those environments, but a lot of players don't like change. So in terms of the next two, this is around the style of play. So style of play is potentially down to the format of play. So obviously, if you're playing one day cricket, it's a little bit different the style that you play compared to 2 day or 4 day cricket. And it also comes down to coach as well. So um, obviously, the coach has one way of wanting to play, but players also have individually different ways that they want to go about doing things. Um, so it's important for us selectors to understand what environment players come from, um, in terms of whether they suit a potential team environment that they may be trialing for. It's also really important for us selectors to understand that junior clubs are often very unstructured and the work ethic and the training environment is poor or non-existent. Um, it's also important for players to understand when they work at their best or in what environments they work in their best. So from a coach's perspective on terms of what style of play that they want to play, it's often, as I said, dictated to by the format. Um, and it's also something that needs to be understood by coach and selector, the fact that the format may be different for what players potentially play. So for example, kids are used to playing limited overs format. They come into grade cricket and then they're given 80 to 96 overs to bat, depending on the grade that they play. And it's very different for them, and often it takes them a bit of time to actually get used to that type of play. So, um, the style of which a coach wants to play has a real impact on potential results for players, but also potential selections by our selectors and coaches. Um, what we look for as a selector is we want to see that players are versatile, so they're able to play in different styles under different pressures, under different situations. Again, we go back to points before about players being able to be really consistent. And I think the main one from our perspective is we want players who are coachable. So, coaches and selectors want to work with guys who are willing to go to the next level, are willing to listen, are willing to try new things, because that's how we learn. We learn through making mistakes and we learn through being in different environments. The next one is a really simple one, is the player a team player or individually focused. Now, just because you're individually focused doesn't mean that you shouldn't be in a team-based environment, but it's really important from a selection standpoint that we don't have too many of those players because obviously the game of cricket is played in a team-based environment. You want to create that team culture, and often if there's several teams in a club, it's club culture. So Obviously, team players are, um, you know, probably preferred, but you need a balance between the two. You need people who are going to be confident enough to stand up and do what they feel like they need to do and put themselves first at times. Um, but you also need a lot of team players around that, supporting those individually focused players. Last but not least, do we see the player as someone who's looking to take the game further into the future? So, a really key point, and this is not just cricket based, but pretty much Australia-wide sporting based. When players start to get to the age of 14, there's a significant drop off in playing numbers at a junior level, so at a normal club level. The reasons for this are pretty simple. Kids get different things going through their heads. So there's relationships, there's potential work opportunities, there's focus on study, there's burnout as well. All these types of things really start to hit home when the kids start get to the age of 14, year nine, year 10 at school. A lot of different opportunities come their way in a lot of different fields. The other thing that we look at is this player committed to our club? I mentioned previously around the fact that some parents and players like to shop themselves around to different clubs. That's not something that I would really want to see in kids that I'm either coaching or selecting for. We obviously look at what needs to and can be improved in the future. So sometimes we make selections on the basis of where a player is going to be or where we feel like a player is going to be rather than where they are now. Um, and sometimes that is referring to someone's technical skills. We feel like they've got a higher ceiling. We feel like, for example, the kid is a fast bowler, but they're quite short and they're 14, 15. We feel like, okay, they're going to have a growth spurt at some point, and it's going to lead them to being a very different bowler to what they are now. So it's worth investing in them. Um, as well, we look at players who are, again, versatile and work really hard in a training environment and handle pressure situations. So all these types of things, we go back to the top. I don't think there's any one question here that is more important than the other. I think they're all important because they start to build an overall picture of particular players and particular teams and the way that they're selected. Each team is selected very differently because obviously the roles are very different. Because the kids trialing might have different qualities each year. They might have different styles of play each year. There might be different commitment levels each year as well. So in terms of players, it's really important to understand what your role or what you think your role is and the type of player that you want to be. And it's also really important to understand why we as selectors make certain decisions. It's not about agreeing with certain decisions, it's about understanding.